Lead Squared is a cutting-edge CRM platform for enrollment management. With Lead Squared, you will deliver a seamless student experience, streamline admissions processes, lower costs, and increase retention. Schedule a demo at leadsquared.com. Welcome back, everybody. It's your time to EdUp on the EdUp Experience podcast, where we make education your business. Dr. Joe Salustio here with you again and again and again. We will never stop. We always say that, but we truly will never stop. Elvin won't let me. He keeps scheduling amazing guests for me to interview. It's the perfect partnership that we have. As the time of the recording of this episode, I am literally got a bag packed to my right here to get on a plane to go to Doha. Perhaps when this episode comes out, I have been back from Doha, so you'll know how excited I am now and how awake I feel. And then now when you hear the episode, when I record, when I come back, you'll hear how tired I am after a 15 and a half, almost 16-hour flight as we record live at the WISE Conference, World Innovation Summit for Education in Doha, put on by the Qatar Foundation. But I'm not here to talk about that today. What I am here to talk about is our amazing guest. But before I bring him in, I want to bring in my amazing guest host. Lots of amazing going around today. You've heard her. You originally heard her on episode 300. And we don't give episode 300 out lightly to anyone. I promise you, when we gave out episode 300. Episode 300 with my guest and my co-author of a new book, and I'm going to let her talk about what the title is. Here she is, marketer extraordinaire, author, Amazon best-selling author, blah, 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 any accolades you could put on top of accolades. Here she is, ladies and gentlemen, Kate Colbert. Oh, Kate, I gave you the wrong... That was the circus button, I'm sorry. But it's a circus when you're writing a book.
It is a circus. It is a circus. So, hey, EdUp Experience friends. Super excited to be here again today, interviewing somebody I know and love, and very, very excited to be talking about our book. By the time this episode airs, we will have unveiled the cover of our book to the world to sort of see. The book is titled Commencement, the Beginning of a New Era in Higher Education, and it features the insights of more than 100 college and university presidents.
So basically what you're saying is this is a book that nobody's ever done before. Nobody has ever taken the insights of over 100 college and university presidents and synthesized those themes into a book. This is a trailblazer, ladies and gentlemen. Kate Colbert is a author trailblazer, and we are just so ecstatic to bring you this amazing, what we think foundational book to what the future of higher education will be. And someone that will add to that book, hopefully the insights, is my guest today, ladies and gentlemen. Here he is, Dr. John Swallow. He's president of Carthage College. John, how are you?
I'm just great. It's great to be with both of you.
I'm glad you're here, my friend, because I have heard nothing but amazing things about you from Kate Colbert, who you know well. In fact, she can't stop talking about how amazing you are, and I got to find out how amazing. And I'm going to tell you, I've got so many questions about higher ed for you, but there's one blazing question that is just in front of me right now, and I have to ask you. You ready for it?
Yes, go ahead.
You have a PhD in mathematics, and in no other degree other than mathematics do I imagine it has a direct line to a college presidency. Because I hear PhD mathematics and I go, oh yeah, that guy's got to be a college president. How do you put those together? How do you get a PhD in math and end up as a college president? It's just fascinating.
Oh, well, first I should say that I majored in math and English, but I did go on in math. And I think that reflects the fact that I like to contemplate and work on very complicated problems, issues. I have a deep respect for beauty, but also know that things can get really quite complex. And I think over the course of my career, first it was spending lots of time teaching, and then wanting to have an impact teaching English or humanities. And then over time, wanting a bigger and bigger scope for the things I did. And so, as you can imagine, these days, there are a lot of really complicated things to think about in higher education. And so that problem-solving aspect of me is what drives me every day. And now at this later point in my career, I'm glad to have a larger impact on more people. It's great to prove something that takes you years and 100 people worldwide can appreciate it. but it's really much more deeply satisfying to affect the lives of thousands of people.
All right, so let's take that, what you just said. How complex is higher education from a view of a PhD in mathematics? Is it financially complex, higher ed? Is it really easy compared to other businesses? So, how do you rank it based on your experiences, and how much of what you do are you using math? And the reason I ask this is because there's different groups of people, right? People think, higher education president, they're just highly academic. They're just, sitting around looking at curriculum all day long, not really doing much with finance. And then there's others that think, oh, wow, higher ed is a complex, business where your accounting and mathematics skills are used day to day. Tell us what your view on that is.
Well, it really is quite complex because you're thinking about people at a very important time in their life. You're thinking about the choices they're making, both financially and also educationally. And then you're thinking about the outcomes that they achieve. Higher education enrolls a very diverse set of people. That's a wonderful thing. But when you start talking about finance, it's easy for some people to forget that much of the actual tuition people pay is discounted. It's indexed to, it could be their academic profile, their financial profile. Then there are different retention rates, graduation rates, and the system, and this is really important, that the system of people and how we interact with our students really does determine a lot. And so that's psychology, that's education, that's sociology. All of those pieces come into play. Now you could say higher education is really pretty simple. Revenue comes from tuition. It comes from room and board. It comes from contributions. There may be a few other things, but those are the main ones. But when you dig into tuition particularly, and how different people are paying different rates and succeed at different rates, it becomes very, very complicated. And another thing that's often forgotten, particularly when I talk to folks, in the business community, we have a very long sales cycle. I could talk to a friend who's selling the same thing every single day. And so what's happening in the marketplace, you get a lot of signals all the time, but we spend, for our undergraduates, basically a whole year talking to them before they decide to come. And so you spend 4 years delivering on the promise, and you spend 1 whole year recruiting the people who will come. And as well as I do, how fast things are changing today. And so you only have so many changes you can make from year to year, and the impacts could be enormous. So I hope that gives a flavor for how I see the complexity of it.
It does, and you're so on. And Kate, I want to bring you in, but I want to just ask one more quick question, and that's around, and you talked about it a little bit. Outlook, enrollment, dollars come from tuition, the discount game. I don't want to call it a game because it's a strategy, but it's a strategy that can be abused in higher education. It's, where, you could price something really high and discount it at 80% if you want to. And, it gives this allure sometimes of elitism, and what students actually pay is different. But students are becoming much more mathematically, back to my original question, and financially aware of how debt affects them. Are you finding your students what's the sense from students that they're just going, okay, wait a second, what is my ROI here? How does this really affect me in the future? What kind of job am I going to get? What's the awareness financially of students?
Well, there's quite a bit of variation, but the essential point, which is that students today know that they're making a very large financial commitment over a number of years. That's absolutely the case. Some have more anxiety about it than others. Some should have more anxiety about it. And you're right. I will say that even that, what you've just named, is incredibly complicated for your college-going family to understand. The amount that's going to be contributed by state and federal government, that might be contributed through loans, that would need to be contributed through the family's own resources, and the students too. And we did feel here at Carthage that it was time to stop with this idea that an ever higher sticker price was somehow the signal. We know that over 60% of families don't realize that private institutions discount at all. And if we're really about enrolling students from every background possible and providing them an education, we need to remove these obstacles to even getting here in the first place. And so that was why we, in 2019, undertook the first significant tuition reset in Wisconsin and lowered our tuition 30%. It didn't change. And I want to be very, upfront and honest about it. It didn't change on average what students paid because we adjusted financial aid too. But the point was that we were pricing ourselves much closer to what many families are actually paying. And that helps people, particularly who haven't been involved in the higher education system with their parents or grandparents, start to understand that it is accessible and it's affordable, and allow us to be in conversation with them.
Oh my gosh, there's so much to dig into here. And John, this is fantastic. Incidentally, I love the way you talk about your left brain, right brain expertise, math and English. I actually recently used you as an example when I was talking about people who are sort of equally left and right brained, but I think you ought to title your memoir Beauty and Complexity. I thought that was lovely. So yeah, you touched on a lot of things, John, that I think are really top of mind for our listeners, for people who work in or serve higher education. So there's so many places where we could jump in, but let's talk a little bit about, you talked about that full year or that of sales cycle of working with admissions and marketing and introducing a school and its programs to a prospective student, and hoping to attract them. So let's talk about that attraction point and enrollment, which is so vital for colleges and universities. As I understand it, Carthage has enjoyed enrollment growth the past few years, while most or all other colleges and universities in the state of Wisconsin have actually experienced enrollment declines. So could you tell us a little bit about your secret? How did Carthage enroll its second largest first-year class in its history during an academic industry downturn and a pandemic, no less?
Okay, there's so much to talk about there. So yes, the facts are that in 2020, our first year class grew 6%, and then for fall 2021, the first year class grew another 5%.
Amazing.
And yes, and it's really a combination of a lot of things. And I'll say at the outset, sometimes schools want to do one new thing a year and then study it. And I don't think there's time to do that anymore. I think we all need to be serving our institutions and serving our students as well as possible and get on with the good ideas that we know are out there. And that's really the approach we've taken. So that in 2019, when we did the tuition reset, we didn't just stop and wait. We also added 3 new sports. We added men's and women's wrestling. We added women's bowling. Recently, we added esports. We've added new academic programs, everything from engineering science to a Bachelor of Music in composition or piano performance. We've added master's programs. Even in music theater, vocal pedagogy, and then at the other end of the spectrum, perhaps sports management, which is to say, and we're also, and I want to name this too, it's not all about the front end, it's about keeping the students that you have so that they succeed. So we've really jumped in, and I'm really proud of the faculty and staff here for undertaking all these initiatives at the same time. And I say what we should be excited about is that more students are coming and more students are graduating. We don't need to undertake the deep research project, perhaps, to know exactly how to attribute the success. But our approach here is to try to launch the programs that we know are in the benefit of the students, critical thinking for critical needs. And I think that's the recipe for why we've had more students come each year.
That's fantastic. Can we talk about that? So first of all, that was something I've heard a lot of at Carthage, this idea of where sort of critical thinking meets critical need. And Carthage historically has really been known for its liberal arts model and its liberal arts root. I would love to hear you talk a little bit about the sort of then and now of a sort of paradox that's facing higher education, this sort of way in which colleges and universities, I think, feel simultaneously drawn to stick to the status quo, to operate within the time frame in which they were founded and keep older alumni happy that things are still as they remember them. But how do we balance that urge and that impetus with the need to operate our institutions in the here and now for modern students and a modern workforce and a drastically different perception of what a college education can be? Can you talk a little bit more about that, John, about your vision and your current work for creating this Carthage of today that's still built upon liberal arts and critical thinking, but that's simultaneously focused on the critical needs of the marketplace and these changing interests of students. How do you balance that?
Yes, great question. And I'd first begin by reminding us all that over the long history of liberal arts colleges in the United States, there's actually been quite a bit of evolution. So it can be somewhat misconstruing it to think that they're all doing exactly what they did when they were founded. For instance, Carthage, like so many other places, was founded to create pastors. And now we're doing a lot of things. We hope we're continuing to create pastors, but there's been a lot of change over time. And I'd say that perhaps we were all living through a few decades where there was less change, and now because of a lot of forces, we're seeing more change. But I'd start there. And then I'd say that for Carthage in particular, and this is one of the things I'm so excited about in our history, is that we did make some changes, including, so we were founded in 1847, but including in 1870, deciding to enroll women and to have a broader curriculum even then. And so this tension, some people call it a tension, I'm not sure that's really the right word, between liberal arts and professions doesn't have to be there. We were teaching classics and business classes in 1870 and enrolling women. And so there was an openness. So Carthage, I would say, had been asking repeatedly in each generation, who needs to be educated and how do they need to be educated? So not to define it that things have to be the same and we need to exclude people or programs, but to see ourselves as in service to society in a way that starts with, of course, critical thinking, starts with the liberal arts, starts with a 4-year program, but then looks out as broadly as possible with that, limited perhaps only by our resources and imagination. And so recently, when we added nursing, we know that there are more nurses needed in the world. We want those nurses to be liberally educated. We think we can do a fantastic job of that here. And so we went ahead and started that, and it's just been a wonderful thing. And that was, of course, before the pandemic. And all of those nurses are out there doing great things for the world, and they have a liberal arts background. So I don't see those things as intention. I do agree they have to be balanced, but that's been our approach, is to think about what the world actually needs and then how we can be part of providing it.
LeadSquared isn't only an enrollment CRM. It's a technology that will allow you to optimize your entire front-end student lifecycle by providing decision makers with real-time customizable dashboards. Forecasting, measuring, and optimizing for key activities will increase retention and revenue, and LeadSquared will lower technology costs simultaneously. Not only can LeadSquared align with existing admissions processes, but the technology will also help you innovate beyond what you thought was possible. The ability to access data on your phone will keep you connected, and when you add in the world-class customer service, LeadSquared transcends being a technology. It's an experience. Check them out at leadsquared.com. Let's talk about that tuition reset just a little bit, John, because I want to, it's not super common for an institution to go through a tuition reset of any kind. And there is a lot that goes into something like that. Consider marketing and messaging and financial aid packaging and repackaging and registrations, and there's just a lot. How did you strategize through that process? And I'll tell you the reason I ask is because my institution, Claremont Lincoln University, did the same thing. We had a tuition reset in August of 2021. And when you sit down and go, okay, we're going to reset the tuition, then you go, okay, wait a second. There's a bunch of consequences in here, positive, right? But it's a lot of work to do something like that. And it takes focus and everyone to be on the same page to pull it off, because it's different timing for different groups of different people. How did you guys strategize through that? And what was the hardest part? And what was the most, what was the most significant, maybe not hardest is the right way to ask about it. What was the most significant part of that decision when it came down to tactics, so to speak?
Oh, those set of great questions there. So.
Hear that, Kate? You hear that?
So in February,
every now and then Joe asks a good question.
Oh, does he?
Wow.
Okay, good. Well, point for Joe there. It was in February of 2019 at our board meeting then that I said that I thought a tuition reset might be the right thing for Carthage. And that was based on my, and I've been president for 2 years, beginning to understand the families that come to Carthage, to understand our financial aid matrix, to understand where we're recruiting. But it was a question. And so I thought about that some more. And then by the time we got to the May board meeting, I said I wanted to convene a task force and work on this weekly. And yes, we would look at how we're perceived. We would look at who's not even in our pool to start with, because they, like so many families, have thought that it's not possible to go to a private institution, or at least Carthage. The value that we provide. And then there are questions along the way. You don't want to be an institution that does this out of a position of weakness, and you certainly don't want the perception of that, even if you're not doing it from a position of weakness. And so you have to have answers to lots of questions that the media and others will have. And then you're right, there's the execution part. It needs to be executed cleanly. You have to choose the timing right. So when we worked through that summer of 2019, with those weekly meetings, which involve finance, marketing, communications, alumni affairs as well, to think through it, by the time we got to August, we thought pretty clearly that we should do it, that we pretty much knew what it should look like. We asked ourselves the question, should we combine it with any other initiative? And then we decided, no, it could be on its own. We began to think about how we could make sure that it received the right and strongest publicity, offering interviews, exclusives with different papers, particularly the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. And so then I went to the board, and we were pretty much ready to go. The communications office had a whole plan ready to go, but we needed to greenlight it. We needed to just say go. And so on a Zoom call, essentially in August, the board voted to do it. And then it was all systems go. We wanted to do it then because we didn't want to wait too late into the, like we've said, the long sales cycle where you start introducing confusion. We want it to be clean at the beginning of the cycle. And so it was September of 2019 where we announced it. So yes, lots of things had to be ready to go, particularly in terms of answering questions that parents and others would have. There are questions along the way. For instance, you might have a recent alumnus who thinks that somehow these students who are coming in are going to have a much better deal. And that, that's not the intent. This was more about attracting by changing the list price. But it's a real concern. You don't want some recent alumni to be upset about it. And so, yes, a lot that went into it. I will say what we didn't do was spend a lot of time trying to understand research of other institutions. I had been through a tuition reset before, and I think it's a very contextual decision. It's not the right thing for every institution, and it may not even be right for the same institution several years apart. So there's a lot going on in the marketplace and in family perception. So I was glad that it just took us from February to September to have the idea and then execute it. But you're right, complexity along the way, and you have to have a good team, and they have to be able to execute quickly, and then frankly get really excited about it, which is what happened.
You said so much in there, and this is such a it's such a unique experience. And when you look at the number of universities in the U.S. and how many actually go through any kind of tuition reset, you're talking about a very small percentage, right? It's super small percentage. And there's decisions like, are we looking forward? Or are we looking back? If we're looking back, are we talking about returning money? Or if we're looking forward, how will current students who've paid the previous rate feel about now that they're getting a new rate? And what is that going to do? Are they going to ask for, like, I want my money back? So there's so many things to consider. A lot, like to your point, alumni coming back and saying, wait a second, what happened here? And it's so important to get everybody on the same page with the communication, because it is an exciting thing to reset tuition, because it's great for the students. It communicates clearly. It's transparent. I give you a lot of respect and credit for going through that process. And when people say it, it's very, I just want to reiterate, it is a very complicated but worthwhile process for both the institution and the student. But it may not be right for everyone, to your point. And Kate, I'll hand it back over to you.
Yeah, no, it's such an interesting conversation. And what's most interesting, I really ought to probably, in the interest of full disclosure to our listeners, share that I have a connection to Carthage College. I'm a Carthage alum. It's where I did my undergraduate degree, and happen to know Dr. Swallow very, very well. I serve on his President's Leadership Council. So I have a lot of questions, but I also have a lot of knowledge about Carthage. And one of the things that I would say that's really struck me that I think is potentially instructive to our listeners who work at various other colleges and universities or institutions that serve higher education is these sort of topics that Joe just touched on around sort of collaboration and transparency. And I think one of the reasons that Carthage has been able to, at least from my limited vantage point as a stakeholder, has been able to execute on so many things, right? So we just spent a lot of time talking about tuition reset, and I'm sort of sitting here thinking, yeah, that's just one thing. Like that's just one of many, many things that Carthage has done in recent years. So, John, you talked a lot about, we don't stop and wait to see what the sort of impact is of one big idea, and we have more than one big idea a year. I mean, Carthage has been through massive positive evolution in the last several years. New diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, and anti-racism plans, and a new athletic team name and mascot, which has really coalesced the team. Go Firebirds, right? And tuition reset, and new programs, and new ways of being that have really, really taken what was already a fantastic school and made it even stronger. And I can't help but think that the ability to do that comes back to what you just said a minute ago, John, when you said, well, we had a really great team. And so,
yeah.
right. It comes down, it's about the people. So we can talk all we want to about traditions and history and big, beautiful buildings and what have you, but it really, the experience that's created for students and other stakeholders really comes down to the employees, to the staff and faculty and administrators at an institution. And that's one of the things I think I've been most impressed about with Carthage in the past. And so there's a question in here for you, John. I think that our podcast listeners kind of all know all too well, probably, the limitations of a workplace structure that's built on silos and bureaucracy, right? Where faculty and staff and administrators are using phrases like, that's not in my job description, or that's above my pay, right? Or that's above my pay grade.
Yikes!
But something really refreshing seems to be happening at Carthage that I've been able to witness from afar, whereby it's often, I think, impossible for your stakeholders to even guess the job titles or reporting structures of the people they meet when they come to an alumni event or they're on campus for some reason, because it's really all hands on deck at your special initiatives and your events. I've noticed that your vice presidents roll up their sleeves literally to get involved in tactical work, that your department,
yeah.
right? Yeah. That departments collaborate seamlessly. So your athletics folks are involved in fundraising, and fundraising is involved in career services, and everybody is supporting alumni relations and admissions. And so I also think that the way that leaders show up, and especially the way that you show up, John, on campus every day is really different from the way other institutions operate and the way that even your institution operated in the past. I mean, gone are the days of students on your campus feeling intimidated by or kept at a distance from the president. I mean, heck, they all know your dog, and so can you tell us just a little bit about what goes into creating a culture that's so collaborative and cooperative, because what you've done at Carthage is really so very impressive.
Thank you, Kate. I'll start by saying that, and maybe this is the mathematician, maybe this is the English major too, but I just start with the idea.
That's you sorting data, John.
That's okay. Thank you. I just start with the idea that we have a lot of work to do on behalf of our students. And so we should start with that. And that work may change from year to year. And then everything else should just follow from that. I mean, why wouldn't you organize for the work instead of starting with some arbitrary organizational structure, committees or titles, and then try to fit all the work into it? And again, I think things are different than the past. Things are changing. And so I've really wanted people to see that over and over, that we might have function under one person, one vice president. We might move it. I want people to feel that that's okay. We can be dynamic. We all have a lot we could do, and we all want to be rewarded, and we need to be given permission to go ahead and do things. But this is as far from silos as I can possibly get it. And also not to have too many steps along the way. Sometimes We feel like we need a lot of committees in place, sometimes because we're just so worried that something might be wrong. But in fact, what we want to do is do a lot of things, and we know we won't get them 100% right, or at least the first time. And we want to enable that, and we want people to feel rewarded and excited every day they come to work. So that's how I start. And I mean, one thing that follows from that is that people's titles might change. What they do from year to year might change. That's not to say that we don't have a lot of standard functions, but we don't want the boundaries to be fixed. We don't want them, we're not trying to organize around those boundaries. We're trying to move the boundaries or have permeable boundaries. And that means lots of teamwork. That means people just need to get in and not wait for the committee meeting, not wait for a whole lot of structure, but just decide how do they think it should go, and then get going on it. So those are some of the principles I use. The truth is, if you ask, you don't need hundreds and hundreds of people on campus all to know or even approve every single thing that everyone would do. That's a recipe for taking too long. So one of the reasons we've been able to do so much is that lots of people are activated, excited to do different things, and they're not spending a lot of time worrying about what somebody else in some other building is doing or whether it's a good idea. They trust that the marketers are marketing, and the faculty are creating programs, and the technology folks are installing all of our new technology. We're trying to have every piece of data touched and be up to date on all of that. And there's enough trust that that's all going to happen. It's all going to work. It probably will be bumpy a little bit here or there. So, and that creates a shared sense of excitement. I will say it's a challenge at an institution that had been smaller, and so it was possible for everybody to know more of everything. So one of the things I have to do is explain to others that I don't know every single thing that's going on, but that's okay, because I have confidence that good things are going on and that the teamwork is happening, and giving people permission maybe not to know or not to worry that they should know, and then be most excited about the things they're doing within their group. So I know that was a lot right there, but maybe that shows you some of the thought process.
Yeah, that's brilliant. No, I love that. And I think I love this, your focus on trust and confidence. And I think that our listeners are probably having an aha moment around this, giving people permission not to know, that you don't have to be in every meeting, you don't have to serve on every committee, you don't have to hear every update, because if you do, you can't possibly be working on the work that needs to be done. You can't possibly be serving. And I absolutely took note of what you said a moment ago around structure, and I won't say it as eloquently as you did, John, but I think it bears repeating. Why wouldn't you organize for the work instead of trying to organize the work under an arbitrary structure? And so I think that's really beautiful, and I think it shows in the results. It shows in how nimble an organization can be and how well you can serve your students and other stakeholders. So my hat's really off to you. I could ask you questions all day. I have a million of them, but I'll probably reserve just one more. But I'm going to ask Joe if he wanted to jump in with a couple of questions before I sort of ask sort of a big final one.
You know what? I do have just one quick one, and it's environmental, if you will. And, you know, Kenosha as a city has seen its share of social disruption as of late. I'm just wondering what students and faculty and staff, how you manage the external, I don't know, emotions of news cycles with, you know, staying focused on education. Because this is just the latest example of I don't know. I guess it's, you know, the COVID presented the perfect storm of financial and health and social disruption. And as we become acclimated, at least in some degree, to the disruptions of COVID, the social disruptions continue. And Kenosha has seen some of it. How do you keep everybody focused? Because I think that's a big, it's been a big disruptor, especially in that area as of late.
Absolutely. So it's been hard for so many reasons for the past couple of years, for the pandemic and the protests, the Kenosha riots, the follow-on events. You know, is an officer going to be charged? Is there going to be a judicial process? And, you know, add into that all the pandemic background. I'd say this is a moment where we all have to pull together as a community, and then some leadership needs to be even pastoral. we could spend all day on any one of those topics because they're all so important and significant and emotional and heart-wrenching. And yet we're all here because we want students to grow and develop and not engage those topics, but engage other things too, so that they become more successful over time, and then use all of this as something to learn from, which will be something that will be true for the rest of their lives. And so trying to keep the emotional level at a place that people respects what's happening, but also allows us to continue to work together on campus. I think that's probably how I've been trying to approach each situation. And it's not only me, it's lots of leaders and influencers on campus, respecting lots of opinion, everywhere from a student who's very concerned that something's happening in Kenosha and may want to go home for the weekend, to a student who's frankly energized by the moment and the debate and wants to be part of it. But I will come back to the fact that we need to be open and also acknowledge the pain, the emotional suffering, because not to acknowledge that at some level makes the workplace, makes the college seem artificial. And so I had to do a lot of thinking about the opening that I wanted for the year and what I would say. And I made the decision to actually take people through all of the events that we went through, some of which were very positive. There were a lot of achievements to celebrate, but also just to remind people how much we went through, both for the new people who didn't always appreciate all that the campus had gone through, but also for the people who've been in place. And I'm hopeful that it was cathartic. There was some good feedback afterwards. And I think it did what I had intended, which is to remind ourselves that we're a community that with a lot of shared experiences. And that's part of what binds us together, is having gone through that together, and how we look forward to the year to come. So there's a lot there, Joe.
Well said, my friend Kate.
Yeah, if I could just, 2 words, John. Thank you. As a stakeholder of your institution, we're all paying attention, and I think the heart and humanity that you and your entire leadership team have brought to these past couple of years, to sort of internal issues and sort of macro issues like the pandemic, as well as sort of local issues around racial injustice and various other issues. I've been very, very impressed, and thank you for allowing everyone to their pain and their feelings and their thoughts to be heard, but to not let the community get unnecessarily mired in something that's sort of not healthy or that's too chaotic. For the rest of my life, I will always remember that the Carthage lessons around some of these things. So there was a shooting at a pub near campus not so long ago, and I'll always remember that, John, one of the first things you talked about once it was established that all of your students were safe and your campus was secure, that you were very publicly and on campus very congratulatory of your nursing students who provided immediate first aid to those who were injured, or the way in which the campus was supportive after the social disruption, that when there were sort of peaceful protests and Carthage students had their voices heard and helped elevate the conversation around diversity and equity and inclusion, and the ways in which Carthage really acknowledged the growth and the maturity of their own students as they all found their ways through these moments in history. So I am impressed and will always be impressed. And I think much of that tenor, much of that tone that has been adopted by the college by and large comes from you as the president, as its leader. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Kate. Those are difficult judgment calls to make in the immediate aftermath of the the shooting across from campus, which thankfully didn't physically affect our students, but that was not the moment to appear or suggest to people that this was we were trying to generate some PR around, in any way positive around what happened. At the same time, there were some real stories of heroism to celebrate. And so they shouldn't be lost over time, and to try to find the right moments and the right ways to say those that, when the shootings happened, some of our nursing students did exactly what you would have wanted them to do. They were administering CPR. They were trying to keep people conscious. And these are all such emotionally wrenching facts and situations. And so it's a real communications challenge and leadership challenge to know what to share with whom, when.
Thank you. And one of the things I think that would be important for, and I'm going to kick this back to a question for you, John, for listeners to know about Carthage College, if you're not familiar with the college or its location, is that while we're conducting this interview in a specific moment in time, right? During year 2 of a pandemic, in the aftermath of some things that have happened in our city that have made the news. Carthage is this unbelievably idyllic campus on the shores, sort of on a bluff overlooking Lake Michigan, which is in and of itself like the best marketing you could possibly have for a college or university, how beautiful your campus is, and a really sort of beautiful, safe place to go to school. And I think the lesson for some of our listeners is that if you work at a small college or university somewhere and you say, oh, well, it's kind of a sleepy town, or not a whole lot happens here, or we never have crises. Everyone has crises. A crisis is always a possibility, and having a leadership team and that's prepared and that's structured and that's trusted and empowered to be able to work together, and sometimes alone to be able to make really important decisions and impossible decisions really quickly, I think is something that every institution should be prepared for, because no one is immune. Not even a school like Carthage, which has such a beautiful history and such a peaceful history, and is located in such an idyllic location. So let me ask you another question. When we think about our listeners at the EdUp experience, most of them work in higher education or in organizations that serve higher education. And so let's talk about the careers. So let's talk to your peers for a second here. What advice, John, might you offer to somebody who works in higher ed, who wants to improve the results of their efforts, or wants to fall in love with their job or their industry again, in the midst of all this change? So what might you say to folks who are either worried about their careers as we approach the 2025 admissions cliff, or as the industry looks less and less like the academia of yore? What is it that excites you every day when you come to work? What is it that you would say to those of us who work in higher education that our future looks like, and what we should be kind of doing or preparing ourselves for?
I think that with all the disruption, with the demographic changes, the demographic cliff that I know you all have been talking about on the podcast, with all of that, to make a personal choice that higher education in general, but higher education for me is deeply meaningful and needed for the future of our society. And yes, we have more pressures than we've had in decades, but that doesn't make the work any less valuable. In fact, it opens up more possibilities to find ways to do higher education better. And that's what motivates me each day, to try to find more pathways to improve retention, to design ourselves for the students who are coming, who are not the same as the students who were here 30 years ago. And so in terms of advice for people and their careers, there will always be a place for faculty and staff who are absolutely committed to that and are committed to being creative, trying new things, not simply waiting to go to a conference and hear what some other institutions did a few years ago that was probably a good idea, but to really understand the students you have, to understand what they face, to understand how to provide the education and the entire environment on a residential campus better. I'd say there's even more opportunity than there was before, because before sometimes being creative meant challenging a lot of the status quo, and people were very comfortable with the status quo. I think a lot of us are not comfortable with the status quo because it just doesn't look like it's going to result in a good decade ahead. And so people at any level who embrace that and provide that value and can inspire their colleagues to the same thing, they'll definitely have long and productive careers.
All right, John. Well, we asked the same final question to every single guest, and that's simply this: what does the future of higher education look like?
The future of higher education in the United States in the next decade will be one of significant change and industry consolidation, and the institutions that thrive through this will be serving their students better and better and better.
I love the succinctness of your answer. Well done. Wow, Kate, thanks for hooking us up with John. Incredible guest. And John, you speak so well about, especially about the social disruption, because it's hard to talk about those things sometimes and get it right, considering the number of perspectives and as a college president, to balance all the stakeholder interest. And I just really appreciate how well you spoke and how calm your demeanor is. I think that probably makes a big difference in poise in those difficult situations.
Well, thank you, Joe. I'm glad to be doing some work, and I'm glad to share it with others too.
Kate, anything else to say?
Nah, I mean, John Swallow, he's the man, right? I only know good people. And, thank you so much
well, you
for.
Know me, do I count too? I guess
you're good. Yeah, you're getting there. No, thank you so much,
Kate. I got to tell you.
I know. I'm just snarky, and that's part of our vibe here at the EdUp Experience. So thanks for letting me sit in every now and then. John, thank you so much for participating. The work that you're doing and the amazing things that are happening at Carthage College, I think are instructive and inspirational to the entire industry. And we know you're an incredibly busy man, and we appreciate you taking the time to spend some with us.
Oh, thank you. It was great to have this opportunity, and I really enjoyed it.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Your guest co-host today, Kate Colbert, my co-author of our forthcoming book, Commencement, A New Era in Higher Education, with insights from over 100 college and university presidents. I will be saying that a lot lately, or not lately. I will be saying that a lot soon. So get used to that. And of course, our amazing guest today, the always poised Dr. John Swallow, president of Carthage College. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just EdUp'd. The Lead Squared integrated CRM functionality will put your institution at the front end of marketing and enrollment strategy by delivering a streamlined admissions process. Capture student interest, segment your audience, create student engagement workflows, and even integrate with your student information system to create longitudinal key performance metrics you've always wanted. You can do all of this and lower your technology costs. Check out leadsquared.com for more info.